cut the ship down to what's known as its berth deck. We must build ships that have never been seen in naval service. You can see where they took sledgehammers trying to break the gun. This is probably one of the greatest battles of the, well, many say it's top 10 battle of world history, believe it or not. And that is because this was not a decisive victory for anyone, but what it was, it introduced a new type of technology into naval warfare. And as you build ships, I have to tell you, you build a cannon that can blow up a wooden ship, well, we have to build something that won't get blown up. Then we have to find another way to blow up that other ship. And so it's a never-ending circle, which is all starts with these ships here. And it all begins, of course, here's Hampton Roads. Let's see, here's Gosport down here. This is the first day battle over here, and the second day battle over here, okay? So, at the beginning of the Civil War, the Union has a Navy Yard here in Virginia. It's called Gosport Navy Yard. It's the largest Navy Yard in the United States. And it is, of course, has 12 ships there in ordinary. Basically, U.S. Navy, when they didn't want to use a ship, get it repaired, they decommission it. So, and there's some ships that are in a section of the yard called Rotten Row, where, we won't use that ship again. One of those ships is the USF United States. And that's United States frigate. That's how we used to do it. And so this is the Pennsylvania right there, which is one of the ships in the harbor. However, when Virginia leaves the Union on April 17, 1862, we'll find that the Confederates all are rabble-rousing around the yard, demanding its surrender. They want these ships. They want the technology that can be produced out of the Navy Yard. This is very critical. And sadly for the Union, they have the wrong guy in the wrong place. The commander or the commandant of the Navy Yard is a man known as Charles Stewart Macaulay, flag officer, been in the U.S. Navy since he was 12 years old. He's now 67, so he's an old salt. Some people said he was too old of a salt. Others all said he just drank too much. So you have to realize he's faced with, on April 17, this is when Virginia leaves the Union. And of course, local residents are clamoring, we want the yard. The yard is critical if the Confederates are going to be able to defend their coastline. They know it, and the Federal haven't really figured it out yet. But so what will transpire is that on April 20th, 1861, the Macaulay will close the gates of the yard at noon, and then they will set about putting it afire, especially the ships. Now, this shows the Merrimack burning, but I have to tell you, they botched this destruction. When you leave here, you can go and see one of the 9-inch Dahlgren guns that was on the Merrimack, actually, or Virginia as it will be called then, and you can see how it was damaged during the March 8th engagement with the Congress and the Cumberland. It blew off a section of the gun called the Chase, and this was their hot shot gun. I'll get into that a little more. So anyway, the Merrimack, when they set her on fire, they actually also pull the seacocks. And the question is, how well does a burning ship burn when it sinks? Not well, okay? Now, they have sent a task force down to try and save the yard under the command of Flag Officer Hiram Paulding. However, it gets there too late, right? And there, as they come into the yard, the ships are already on fire. So Paulding will order his men to destroy as much equipment as they can. That gun out at the entrance to the monitor center, you can see where they took sledgehammers and banged at the trunnions and the castable trying to break the gun. Well, that just doesn't work well. And so the Confederates actually gained 1,200 pieces of naval ordnance when they captured the yard. So that's a big boom for the Confederates. Nevertheless, so when the ship is burning, of course, the Seacocks are pulled, it sinks. Next to it is the Germantown. It turns over and isn't totally destroyed. So the Federals leave the yard, and on April 21st, 1861, the Confederates walk into the Navy Yard, and amongst the ashes there, they have the wherewithal to build a fleet. And so basically, the whole idea is that the Secretary of the Navy for the Confederacy is a man known as Stephen Russell Mallory. And Mallory used to be in the U.S. Senate. He was chairman of the U.S. Committee on the Conduct of Naval Affairs. Wow, what a guy. And so when the South leaves the Union, he says, we must build ships that have never been seen heretofore in naval service. We must build ironclads, they must be steam powered, and they must have a ram, and they must have rifled guns. Why do we want those things? Because the U.S. Navy has a wooden fleet, and if the Confederates can get an ironclad in the water first, that will give them a tremendous advantage. Well, so in essence, so this is how the Virginia looked in dry dock. Here's a nice little model that was brought to me. Now, basically, what they did is they cut the ship down to what's known as its berth deck, okay? And then they put on top of it this casemate that went 170 feet in length so that it could be armed with 10 guns. Now, these 10 guns are pretty spectacular, right? The forward gun, stern, is going to be a 7-inch Brooke gun. That's right. John Mercer Brooke, a naval scientist who used to work for Matthew Fontaine Maury. He comes up with the idea of the casemate, considering the limited industrial ability of the North or South. And so he decides, well, we can do these casemates. And so just think, this casemate is made of 24 inches of oak, yellow pine, and white pine backing, covered by 2 layers of 2-inch iron plate. And they knew that considering the current ordnance, that would reflect off of the ship. So, anyway, there it is in dry dock, and you can see the ram. No one had used rams since 1571 and the Battle of Lepanto. So this is, whoa, why are we having a ram? Well, the big thing is Confederacy doesn't have a lot of gunpowder, so their idea was just run around and ram ships, a lot of fun. And so they put on 1,500-pound cast iron ram. So, things had been turning bad for the Confederacy in the first part of 1862. Defeats along the Mississippi River, defeats along the North Carolina coast. the Union was starting to use its Anaconda Plan, and so the Confederacy looked like it was in serious trouble. Plus, there was this huge Union army commanded by George Brinton McClellan up in D.C., ready to strike like a snake against Richmond. Well, maybe not quite like that, but the big thing is that so the Confederacy feels like it's being hemmed in. So on the morning of March 8th, 1862, the ship will take its shakedown cruise. Now, it has a new commander. Its commander is going to be a man known as Franklin Buchanan. Franklin Buchanan, all I can say is he was the first Commandant of the U.S. Naval Academy. He was a hero during the Mexican War. He was commander of the Washington Navy Yard. And he was from Maryland, and his grandfather was actually a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So when you have the Baltimore riots, he thinks Maryland's leaving the Union. He resigns his commission, and then all of a sudden Maryland didn't leave. And so guess what? He asked for his commission back. And Gideon Welles says, "You are a traitor," and so Buchanan joins the Confederate Navy. Yay. So he's one of the most aggressive officers in the old Navy, as we would call it. And so he knows he has this ship, and he knows also from reports that the Federals are now building ironclads up in New York. So he's got to get his ship ready to go. So just imagine this, we go down the Elizabeth River, and we actually, let me just chart this. Yeah. So we go down the Elizabeth River. This is 8 miles, and the ship gets to here, right? And this is Craney Island, Sewell's Point next to it. People live around here. The Sewell's Point is where the aircraft carriers are. So when he gets there, he calls all his men onto the gun deck, and he says, "Men, today we must do our duty, not just our duty, but more than our duty. Today we will attack the Union fleet." That Union fleet was 5 major warships, the 52-gun sailing frigate, the St. Lawrence, the 42-gun steam screw sloop, the Roanoke, the 47-gun steam screw frigate, the Minnesota, the frigate sailing Congress, 50 guns, and then the sloop of war, Cumberland, 24 guns. So, when you get down to this point right here, and you look and you can see the Federal fleet arrayed out in front of you. Actually, it was Wash Day. It's a Saturday. I mean, we really... I think today is March 8th, isn't it? So just picture yourself here in Hampton Roads on this very day, and this thing comes down the Elizabeth River. Some people were cheering. Others said, "Go on with your metallic coffin. You'll never amount to a thing." But this is Wash Day in the U.S. Navy, and so all their undies and stuff were hanging from the yard arms. All of a sudden, a lookout on board the Minnesota said, "You need to take a glass, sir, and look over there. I think that things are coming." Well, yeah, and they describe it as looking like a floating barn roof with a chimney belching smoke. Okay, and one person on the Zouave called it, Harry Reiner, called it looking like a half-submerged crocodile intent on evil. Well, that's exactly what it was. So now Buchanan wants to go after the Cumberland first, because he has heard that the Cumberland has a rifled gun on board. And they say it's a 70-pounder, but actually there was no such thing as a 70-pounder rifle. It has to be a 60-pounder rifle. And so, but that could damage the ship, he thought. So what ship is he going to sink first? That one. So he will come around the Newport News Point, and he has to pass the Cumberland, which you see right over here. This is a distorted painting, okay? They try to fit everything in. In this case, the Virginia heads directly towards the Cumberland. The Cumberland will face it broadside, and as the Virginia passes the Congress fires a salvo or a broadside at the Virginia, and the shot bounced off its sides like pebbles thrown against a brick wall. And they head directly to the Cumberland. They'll crash into the Cumberland, creating a hole large enough for a horse and cart to go through. However, E.A. Jack down in the engine room said, I felt our ship shudder as we struck the enemy, and then I felt our ship take on a decidedly dangerous tilt. Yes, sir, Bobtail. The Ram is in there, and the Virginia, now remember it had bad engines, well, they can't get it into reverse, and so it's starting to go down with the Cumberland. However, the Ram breaks off, and the Virginia floats away about 50 feet. And then for the next half hour, tremendous broadsides are sent into both ships. In fact, this half hour is where the Virginia suffers most of its damage during the entire two-day battle. So the Virginia actually will, let me tell you, the shot hitting the side of it, you couldn't get close to the casemate, otherwise you'd get deaf. You put your hand on the casemate, as one sailor did, and the shot hit right outside of it and shattered his arm, okay? In fact, the Virginia is coated with what's called ship grease, that is tallow and pig fat, right? So just imagine, you're in this ship, fierce guns firing away, that ship is sinking, but he doesn't care, it's still firing. And so one man, Jack Cronin, turns to his friend John Hunt and says, "Don't it smell like hell?" Remember, the smells are sulfur, gunpowder, bacon, and coal dust, right? And coal. So that's like the nether regions. And the guy says, "Yeah, we'll soon be there." However, the Cumberland will shudder as its commander, Lieutenant George Uphand Morris, shouts to its crew, "Give 'em a broadside, boys, as we go." Oh my gosh, just as you see there, the Cumberland goes down with its guns firing and its flag still flying. And as it sinks, the flag is above the water, right? And so that's a symbol. But the Virginia doesn't care about symbolism. What the Virginia wants to do is sink more wooden ships. And so it has to go up the James and turn around. And this ship is so unwieldy that it takes a half hour to turn the ship around, right? And as it's making that turn, it fires at transports along the shore at Camp Butler, also Newport News Point, and it will sink actually 2 transports at that time and capture another. Wow, the Virginia now heads to the Congress. The Congress has run aground. Sadly, instead of running aground with your guns facing out, run it around like that. And so what's going to happen? Well, the Virginia is going to stand off that ship about 100 yards and fire shell, shot, and hot shot into the Congress. And when I say hot shot, this ship is a wooden ship killer. It has on board rifle guns, 2 rifle guns, 7-inch rifled guns designed by John Mercer Brooke, 2 6.4-inch rifled guns designed by John Mercer Brooke, 6 9-inch Dahlgren guns, 2 of which were fitted to fire hot shot, right? And hot shot, you think, oh, wow, how do you have that going on in a ship? Well, they have a special furnace down below the hatch. And so once the shot gets red hot, cherry red is the color they describe, then you take it out of the furnace and you take it up to the gun deck carefully. And remember, you got gunpowder and everything like that on board. And then you carefully load it. And to load a hot shot, you have to put in a dry sabot, a wet sabot, the hot shot gun, and gunpowder first, then the dry sabot, then the wet sabot, then the hot shot, then another sabot, so that it stays in there while you're aiming it. You only have a couple of minutes to do this, but John Randolph Eggleston, who commands the hot shot guns, says, I loved skipping my hot shot so that it was can you believe skipping a cannonball? But as it could skip off the water and it would rise up into the hull of the enemy's vessel. Actually, when the Virginia first passes the Congress, hot shot lodges next to the magazine. The ship catches fire because also explosive shells. That's why we have ironclads, because an explosive shell hits the side of a ship, creates a ragged hole, right? And you can't fix that real quickly. But you realize that it also sends splinters, iron and wood splinters across the deck. That's anti-personnel. And then also sparks. And sparks in a wooden ship aren't very good. And so basically the Cumberland will be bombarded by the Virginia. The commander of the Congress, Lieutenant Joseph Smith, will be killed and the ship surrenders. While this is all happening, Buchanan gets up on what's called the hurricane deck. In other words, he's up on top of the ship and he's orchestrating some of his gunboats to go alongside and take off the wounded and everything. I want to tell you, his brother, Thomas McKean Buchanan, is on board the Congress. So, I don't know. And he did survive the battle. So as the Confederates go along the surrendered Congress, actually a shell from the Virginia crashed through the headquarters of the commander of Camp Butler at Newport News Point, a man known as Brigadier General Joseph King Fenno Mansfield, a graduate of West Point, class of 1821. And with that, he goes down to the beach. He orders his men to fire on the Virginia and those gunboats alongside. And one of his officers says, we can't do that. There's a white flag. And Mansfield says, I haven't surrendered, have I? And so that's when Buchanan, up on the deck of the ship that sank 2 major ships, your enemy, the men on the shore, will start firing. And they will cause Buchanan to actually call below for a musket. He shoots back at them. You see a crazy guy on top of a ship that has destroyed your fleet. What are you going to do? You're going to shoot him. He's shot in the hip, and they take him down onto the gun deck, and he shouts to the men, do not worry. I will soon be back amongst you. The wound is not mortal. Well, it's a pretty bad wound, but Catesby Ap Roger Jones now takes command of the ship. This is the moment I'm talking about right now. And basically, Jones will take the Virginia back. Now, let me give you the timeline. They leave at about noon. It takes them an hour and a half to get across Hampton Roads. By 3:30 in the afternoon, the ship has sunk the Cumberland. And that moment, 3:30 on March 8, 1862, if you're still in the museum, you should give a great huzzah, because that very moment is where naval warfare changed from wood to iron, proved the power of iron over wood. Oh my gosh, this is such a moment. And so, the Virginia is then heading back to destroy the other 3 major Union warships. However, the tide's going out, darkness is coming, and so the Virginia heads back to a buoy off of Sewell's Point, determined to finish the job next day. Now, when the Federals, and I got to tell you guys, there's no secrets whatsoever during the Civil War. There's a newspaper, Lynchburg, Virginian. They announce, we captured Gosport Navy Yard. We have enough iron there to build a fleet of ironclads. Oh, my gosh. And, of course, who gets that? The Northerners, okay? And so just like with the Monitor, when it sailed, it's actually in the New York Times. So the Confederates know it's coming, because there's spies everywhere. All you gotta do is read the New York Times and you go, oh my gosh. Actually, the plans of the Monitor were in the magazine known as Scientific American magazine. Oh my gosh, that's not very good, because the Confederates get a hold of that magazine, so they know exactly what this thing is all about. This ship was almost not built. It is a strangest craft you can ever see. As you can, it's built in 3 parts. Part 1, the turret. Part 2, the armor deck. Part 3, the hull. And so, what this means is that all that weight is resting on that hull, and the armor deck actually, you can see it there. It goes up into the up to the armor deck, but it leaves, there's open space. That open space causes the ship to not be seaworthy. Oh my gosh. Now they got to take it down for New York. Now this vessel is going to be called a 4th class steamer because it's armed with 2 guns. And those 2 guns are 2 11-inch Dahlgren guns. John Erickson was the inventor of this vessel, and he felt that the turret rotations are going to be able to damage anybody it comes in contact with. The trouble is, it's got to get from New York to Hampton Roads, and during the trip south, they will encounter a severe gale. The ship almost sinks. However, it survives, and on March 8th, 1862, at around 5 o'clock, it enters the Chesapeake Capes. And you can imagine, they look across into Hampton Roads and they see the Congress burning. They hear the boom of artillery. They recognize that this is, we're a day late, but we're still going to see what we can do. The commander of this ship is a man known as John Lomer Worden. Worden was been in the U.S. Navy since 1834. He is a lieutenant. He is considered a scientific officer. Actually, he's the first POW of the Civil War because Worden had gone down to Pensacola to deliver secret dispatches, which he memorized and destroyed the dispatches so he could go on to the naval fleets and land, Union troops to save Fort Pickens, and that meant Pensacola would be no longer could be served as a major base for the Confederacy. So he gets captured after that, and he comes back up. He gets exchanged in November. He goes home, and he's resting when he gets a letter from Joseph Smith, who is chief of the Bureau of Docks and Yards, and he says, I want you to take command of the Monitor because I believe you're the right sort of officer to take command of this ship. As a result of that, Worden goes down, takes a look at the Monitor, and writes back, says, I feel that I can be the agent to prove this ship a success. And he meant every word. So the Monitor, I could spend 5 other lectures on just how it was built. there's Worden, and so the Monitor comes down, and it comes down to Hampton Roads, and it comes into harbor. It stops next to the Roanoke, where the commander of the station, John Marsden, happens to be on. So Worden says, what do you want me to do? Marsden says, go protect the Minnesota. Now, the Minnesota during the March 8th battle had rushed to go join the battle off of Newport News Point, but it had run aground seriously. As the Confederate ship had gone back to its buoy, they had fired into it. So it's already been damaged. In fact, its commander, a man known as Henry Gershon Van Brunt, will say, oh my gosh, my ship's run aground. What am I going to do? They hope to float it at the next high tide. In the meantime, the Monitor pulls up next to the Minnesota, and Worden gets up on top of the turret and says, hails, and Van Brunt will look down and says, what are you? And Worden says, I'm the Monitor. I'm here to protect you. And Van Brunt looks down and says, I don't know what you're going to do tomorrow, but I will sink my ship before I surrender. Oh my gosh, this is a great theme in the U.S. Navy. So, in essence, Worden waits for the Virginia for daylight to come out. Now, there's fog on Hampton Roads. I have to tell you that the ship is now commanded by Catesby Roger Jones. Jones will head towards the Minnesota. However, the Monitor will come out and attack the Virginia, because its job is to keep the Virginia away from the wooden ship. So this is fought in concentric circles, and each side is trying to find an advantage on the others. Now, I got to tell you, the Virginia has, like its smokestack is so riddled, a flock of crows could fly through unimpeded, right? It's got 2 guns with their muzzles knocked off, and it's got all these dents in its armor. Doesn't matter, the Virginia still floats, and so it's going after the Minnesota. The Monitor has lots of problems. This is new technology, and oftentimes, does new technology work all the time? The answer is no. And on the Monitor, the pilot house, which is at the bow of the vessel, right there, is where the captain, the pilot, and the quartermaster have to be. Now, they have a speaking trumpet that will send voice messages up into the turret. You want to fire 5 points to starboard. Now, what the Federals did was paint white marks below the turret so you could turn the turret up, we'll stop here, and fire. But that device got salt water in it, and so it didn't work. So they had to have a runner going down through the Monitor back up into the turret and say fire. The big trouble, if you're in the turret, you can't see outside, right? And so basically, you have about like that over the 11-inch Dahlgrens. So when the turret swings, and I gotta tell you, they had no way to properly stop the turret because the turret, right, had its own engine, and its linkage gear had gotten so much salt water on it, guess what? It started to rust, and it didn't work accurately. So you got this problem. The Monitor's turret is firing on the fly. Well, that's not very good. It's kind of Monitor roulette, because see the gun level and the pilot house? That means you could hit the pilot house with your own guns. That's a no-no. So after 2 hours of fighting, the Monitor will break off action. You know, I got to tell you, the Confederates are shocked when they see the Monitor. Actually, KCP Roger Jones knows exactly what that ship is, and they describe it as a tin can on a shingle. They think it's a barge ready to take people off the Minnesota. So they're all happy. We're going to destroy the Minnesota. And so the Monitor is in their way. The Monitor has to be stationary to reload the shot into the turret. And so at that time, the Monitor goes onto the shoal. The Virginia heads towards, guess what? The Minnesota. However, the Virginia will run aground. When it runs aground, I have to tell you, this is, oh my gosh, we're stuck, right? And these engines are trying to push or pull the ship off the mud bank, and so finally they do. But before they do, the Monitor got more shot in its turret, will come up to the Virginia and fire at it. But the trouble is they can't see out of the turret. And because of that, they don't fire at the vulnerable hull of the Virginia. Instead, they fire at the casemate. And, you know, it's a comedy of errors when you see all these problems on these ships, and which is, has to be, because these are experimental ships. However, the Virginia backs off, right, and finally out of the mud. It strains its engines. Then it sees the Monitor, and so Jones decides to ram the Monitor. Well, here you go. Here's the Monitor, and the Virginia tries to ram it, right? And at the very last moment, the Monitor veers off, but the Virginia still hits the side, the armored deck of the Monitor, and as a result of that, only the Virginia is damaged. Now, Worden notices that the fantail of the Virginia is a little out of water. Remember, they spent all this coal, all this gunpowder, all these cannonballs, and so it's floating a little high. And Worden can see that propeller, and he recognizes what I need to do is to ram that propeller. And so the Monitor picks up, and I got to tell you, the Virginia goes 5 knots, the Monitor goes 7 knots. So we're not talking about real fast ships. But I got to tell you, there are over 20,000 people watching this battle. Hampton Roads is an amphitheater. People would rent space on an oyster boat. They didn't care. They wanted to see this history in the making. And so the Monitor builds up speed as it nears. Now, I got to tell you, the Monitor had some problems before it left Brooklyn. One of them was with its steering. So Erickson said, I'll fix that steering, and he jury-rigs a system. So the rudder works. However, when they're after trying to ram the Virginia, ready for this? A steering malfunction will make it miss the Virginia, and it glides behind the fantail of the Virginia, and the Virginia will fire a shot from its stern 7-inch Brooke rifle and a shell, and that's fired by John Taylor Wood, and it hits the pilot house and it explodes right as Worden's looking out the slit. And so he falls back. I'm blinded. I'm dead. And, everyone's shocked. Fortunately, Peter Williams, who's the quartermaster, will take the ship over to the shoal. They have to go get the executive officer, Samuel Dana Green. So there's a half hour of confusion, and Worden's standing there still. There's about 20 people on the Monitor. that claimed they helped helped word into his bunk. You couldn't have the room, and so I don't know who to believe. But the bottom line is, Samuel Green comes down, and they take word into his cabin. He's blinded, right? Dr. Long will start using a camel pencil to pick out powder out of his eyes. Ugh. You know, you can just imagine that. And so, Green says, well, what do you want me to do? You know? And Worden says, well, don't worry about me. I'm dying here. Worry about the Minnesota. Save the Minnesota. So the Monitor comes back into action after this half hour. The Virginia thinks the Monitor has given up, at first. And so as a result of that, the pilots all say, well, you can't get close enough to the Minnesota because the tide's going out. We don't want to be trapped out here. And so the Virginia goes back into the Elizabeth River. And I have to tell you, the Battle of the Ironclads is over. This sends shock waves. Let me tell you, the Union has a telegraph line that goes from Newport News Point to Fort Monroe, Cape Charles, up the eastern shore to Love Point, crosses to Annapolis, and then to Washington. So within 2.5 hours, everybody in Washington knows what's happening. They know about the sinking of the Cumberland. They know about the sinking of the Congress. And as a result of that, they have a cabinet meeting, and actually Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, will be looking out the window, moving the curtains and thinking as he would say, the Merrimack is coming. Well, Gideon Wells says, you can't come here, because it has too great of a draft. It had a draft of 22 feet. But still, this has struck fear in the U.S. government. The Confederates were jubilant because if this ship can sink any wooden ship and the Federals have nothing to stop it, nothing is to stop it from going up to Philadelphia, right? Baltimore, and maybe even New York, although it could not make it to New York, I will just tell you, Like today is 55 degrees, right? That's what March 8th was like, and so was March 9th. Not a cloud in the sky, not a ripple on the roadstead, and this battle is fought. And so, in the immortal words of Franklin Buchanan, sink before surrender. Thank you all.